He was a morbidly obese surgeon destined for an operating table and an early death. Now he's a rebel MD who is fabulously fit and fighting to make America healthy again. This is Stay Off My Operating Table with Dr. Philip Ovadia.
Hey, welcome, folks. It is the Stay Off My Operating Table podcast, Dr. Philip Ovadia, and we are joined tonight by, I'll confess, this was one of my favorite guests we had a couple of years ago, and I was so thrilled, Phil, when I saw that you had invited her back, Dr. Roshani Sanghani. And at that, I'm just going to hand it over to you because I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Yeah, so am I. Really excited to have her back. We promised to get her back when the book that she was working on at the time that we spoke was out, and it is now out and has been out for a while. Real excited about Turnaround Diabetes. It is a great reference, I'll say, for anyone interested in, management of diabetes. And we're excited to have Roshani back to talk about the book and talk about all the other great work that she's been up to. With that, welcome, Roshani. Why don't you maybe kick it off by talking about the book? What was your sort of goal for writing it? And just maybe talk about the experience a little bit.
Sure. Thanks, Phil and Jack. Again, it's always good to see you both. I remember our last conversation and we just went so deep into just getting to exchange ideas about healthcare. And the book is sort of a culmination of all of that. My thoughts about, or even my perspective on how healthcare needs to be and how diabetes care specifically needs to be, and how people's experience with diabetes can be so much better if only they have the information that is now in the book. And I just wish that I had a book like this when I was in medical training as a doctor. I had to learn this through my own frustration, my patient's frustration, curiosity, and even, I would say, a lot of individual effort on my part to go out of my box of education, to go learn about exercise, learn about nutrition, learn about sleep, learn about stress management. I didn't know anything about anything of these. I just knew how to prescribe the medications. And
yeah, it's crazy. It's just.
Yeah. And, in India, you enter medical school when you turn 18 after 12th grade, which I think you guys call it senior year of high school. We start first year medical school. There's no 4 years of pre-med in between. So the commitment to become a doctor happens even earlier than that, maybe when you're 17 or maybe 16. And we went into healthcare, most of us, to help people heal. And what was beginning to happen, this sort of almost like a out-of-body experience, is if you look back and zoom out at your practice in diabetes, oftentimes doctors will feel like, my patients don't get better. Diabetes is chronic and progressive. And I was facing that, and yet it's like the frog in the boiling water kind of analogy, that if you're in water and the water starts to go from room temperature and it starts to slowly reach boiling, you just don't realize that you're in this. Similarly, I didn't notice that I had blinders on, where I was becoming just a drug prescriber and I was not empowered with the tools. The practice and the book talks about the first patient that sort of forced me out of my comfort zone. And I think, Phil, you and I agree, is a lot of these sort of doctor transformations happen either through our own personal health wake-up calls or that patient, who just shook us out of our training blinders, So that's how the book started.
Yeah. And, it's a great read. And one of the things I like about it is, you definitely wrote it kind of primarily towards the patients, the people that are struggling with diabetes, but you do have a lot in there for the practitioners as well. And you actually have a section at the end sort of directed towards them in that attempt to try and get them to wake up or, get their blinders off, as you said. So maybe talk a little bit about what your experience has been with other practitioners, and just to kind of maybe remind our audience, or for those that haven't, didn't listen to the first episode, and we certainly encourage you to go back and do that. You have a little bit of a unique experience in that your training and your practice has happened both in India and the United States, and you've been sort of back and forth and get to see the different systems.
Yes. So I did medical school in India and then came to the United States. So I've had about 1, 2, 3 international moves. First from the US to India when I was 10 years old. My first 10 years of life were in Chicago. And then from the age of 10 till 23, I was in India finishing med school. And then from 23 to 33, I was back in Chicago doing internal medicine and endocrinology and practicing there in private practice for 2 years in the same health system that Tony Hampton is in Chicago. Yeah. And we didn't know back then. We were only meant to meet in San Diego this August for the first time, but similar mindsets. And so I was in that system for 2 years. And then in 2011, I moved back to India. So now it's been, 13 years again here. And I've kept in touch with my background in both places. So I really feel like my view is it doesn't align with only one locality. It's more about looking for what's the best practice wherever I go, and maybe not feeling bogged down by one system way of thinking. I think that was one luxury I had, was I got to come in as an outsider and look with fresh eyes. And that helped, so I was able to sort of maybe question things more and just design my own way. I didn't feel obligated to do things the way everybody else was doing them. And of course, doing it still with science and with the right foundations. And that's how the practice evolved. In 2016, I left hospital practice. Up until 2016, I was your standard endocrinologist sitting in a hospital, having my outpatient office visits and taking rounds in the hospital where I would see people with diabetes admitted. And I always felt this sense of heartbreak when I saw somebody with diabetes in hospital for complications of diabetes. And our job at that point, I'm an endocrinologist, so we're considered the last resort, ultimate expert when it comes to diabetes management. Our education takes us the furthest in understanding the hormones, understanding insulin. And so the most difficult cases of diabetes would be referred to us. So similarly, in hospital, it was our job to be called in when there would be unstable glucose levels and somebody needed insulin adjustments. And I just felt this is so late in this person's journey where things are already falling apart. Their health is already in distress. There are organs, it's maybe cardiac issues or kidney issues, infections, amputations. I was just so heartbroken that all I'm doing here is dialing insulin up and down by a few units because the glucose is high, so I give more insulin. Glucose is low, give less insulin. It's almost like I don't feel like I'm actually adding value here. And endocrinologists have a very high burnout rate. And I wonder if this is one of those reasons, is physician burnout, that you came into healthcare thinking you were going to help people heal, and diabetes doesn't give you that experience of, oh yeah, my patient is healing. So in that sense, I'm trying to remember how I got to this. Yeah, so the unique experience was in 2016, I finally decided that I want to take over the entire experience of making sure that the nutrition advice comes to my patient through what I've studied and learned, because by then I had read about, Jason Fung, I had read about Eric Westman, David Ludwig, Robert Lustig. I had read all this material, Gary Taubes, and all these thinkers, Nina Teicholz. All of this was now changing the way I saw it. And I couldn't stay in the hospital system and borrow the nutrition advice from the hospital dietitian or the hospital physical therapist. I needed to sort of take over the entire thing, give them the stress management counseling, give them the exercise supervision. So by doing it myself from 2016 onwards, I had a lot of experience. And by the time I decided to write this book, it all culminates into the analogy that I use in the book is the 4 wheels of the lifestyle car. And I say that because sometimes, people feel like diabetes is all about diet. And yes, diet is a very big part. I call it the first wheel in the lifestyle car. But there are three other wheels, and it only takes one flat tire to have you get stuck in the middle of the road. So it's nutrition, sleep habits, stress management, exercise in that order. And sometimes people with diabetes or overweight are told, eat less, move more. So they're talking about the first wheel and directly the fourth wheel. And people who have tried to exercise when they're not feeling well know how difficult that is. So I keep
Oh,
exercise,
that's the reason for the sequence
the
or for
sequence.
the
Exercise is
priority.
last. So let's get you feeling better by fixing the first three wheels. Let's have you feel more energetic because you're getting better nutrition, better sleep, better stress management. You're in a better mood and frame of mind and physically more rested and nourished. And now automatically you're going to want to exercise. So exercise is purposely fourth. And the fifth optional tool becomes intermittent fasting. If your four wheels are okay and you still have a distance to go to get your diabetes to turn around, we can add intermittent fasting. That's the analogy.
It's
Yeah, I did.
fascinating that, I'm sorry, go ahead, Phil.
No, I was just going to say I did find it interesting, the order that you put those in, right? And I think most people in most physicians in the metabolic health space acknowledge, those four pillars of health. But I think you put it in a little different order than most would. And particularly, I found it interesting that you put sleep as number two, right? I think everyone kind of agrees at this point, at least in the metabolic health world, right, that diet comes first. But to see sleep as number two was interesting. What kind of makes you think that sleep is the second most important factor?
Yeah. So again, I had spent so many years listening to patients' complaints or symptoms, and low energy and chronic fatigue was just top, very high on the list. And I was like, how am I going to get someone with low energy and chronic fatigue to exercise? So I would go into sleep and I would find that either they had sleep apnea that wasn't diagnosed, obstructive sleep apnea, where the snoring was so bad that they were losing oxygen supply at night, every night, just by choking on their own airway at night. Or they just had sleep habits, or sleep hygiene methods that were depriving them of restful, restorative sleep every night. So they're waking up on the back foot, they're waking up behind, they're just waking up exhausted and tired and drilling through the day. And I was like, my work is behavior change. Diabetes, if I believe in the lifestyle change approach first, that let's help people change their habits so that I can help them have less medication on board to have better glucose levels, I need the patient to make a ton of behavior change. How is someone going to make behavior change with an exhausted brain? And so it's like, sleep is for the brain. I need their brain to be rested. And most people like to hear you say, eat more. In my population, I end up having them eat more of this first. I'm like, eat more of protein because they're usually not getting enough. And I'm saying, sleep more. I'm not taking things away. And I'm not torturing them with, horror stories of going to the gym when they don't feel up to it. And I trust that people are not lazy, that the reason they're not exercising is not because they want to be sedentary and want to be inactive. It's because they don't feel good. They don't feel energetic. And the human nature, just from a newborn baby, the minute they can, actually, even before they're born, they're kicking inside, they're moving. It's nature to move. And humans have so many joints. We have joints down to our little toes. We're designed to move. And, when you add the metabolic health thing to it, when you think about unhealthy mitochondria, they're just not burning fuel efficiently. So if I could fix nutrition, fix sleep, then of course there's third one being stress management. I know they have more healthy mitochondria now, which will fuel and power exercise. At the fourth stage, I'm not the one pushing them. You need to go work out. You need to go for a walk. You need to get more active. They're already telling me, hey, I have more energy now. And it's always easier when it's coming from within rather than a push from the outside.
Stress is one of those things that's a little harder to define than nutrition or maybe the sources of stress. I'm wondering, do your patients typically experience a natural reduction in their mental or emotional or psychological experience of stress simply by virtue of uh, improving their dieting and improving their sleep?
Yes. And this would sort of, nod to metabolic psychiatry, which is, the term came from Stanford initially, and now pioneers like Georgia Ede and Chris Palmer, they're taking it forward, and metabolic mind. So the whole idea of metabolic psychiatry is the brain is a metabolic organ. And if I'm trying to fix metabolism for diabetes, it's obvious that metabolism in the brain is also going to get better, even though I'm not a brain doctor. The brain is going to have first dibs, if you will, on healing. And yes, the minute we fix nutrition, getting people's carbohydrates, inflammatory foods, sugars, processed things, alcohol down, and the minute we have them sleeping better, they tell me that their third wheel, their mood, is better. They're just feeling more confident, more optimistic, less cravings. Again, the battle with food is so strong sometimes in diabetes and overweight. The food battles are just automatically internally in their head less difficult, and sort of anxiety levels come down. And I've never had to prescribe psychiatric medication or refer to a psychiatrist for worsening mood, worsening, thinking patterns. It's always been the other way, that if someone's on those medications, they have to go back to their psychiatrist and say, I don't want all these side effects. I'm feeling better. Let's work on reducing the doses.
Yeah, quite interesting. And speaking of sort of the mind, I think one of the other unique things, about the book and about how you approach practice, quite frankly, is the, some of these techniques that you use. And I believe you call it motivational interviewing. And I think we talked a little bit about that the first time, but, I think it's worth going into again and maybe talk a little bit about what that is and how you apply it in your practice.
Yes, thank you for asking that. I wanted to be a psychiatrist. Actually, I did a year of psychiatry before switching to internal medicine. And the switch was more because I wanted to remain hands-on, nitty-gritty in core details of internal medicine, but I was still, and I still am, clearly very interested in behavior change and the mind and how thoughts and decisions end up showing up as habits and health ultimately. And motivational interviewing came from the psychiatry addiction space. So if we go to addiction, and specifically it started with, people who struggled with alcoholism or drug use, substance use, nicotine. And the notion back then this was in the 70s, was that, again, addicts are the most difficult patients. They don't want to get better. And this was almost like it was okay to say this. Of course, now we don't speak like this, but the doctors, the psychologists who came up with this idea, they started with the first assumption is everybody wants to get better. Everybody. Everybody wants to do well. Everybody wants to thrive. If somebody looks like they're stuck in a harmful behavior that's not helping them, then our job as the healthcare professional is to help them as the client figure out where they're stuck. So being stuck actually is normal. And it's almost like you're looking for that. You're trying to get the conversation to go to that point where you can help them see where they're stuck. So in diabetes, let me give you an example, is you have a craving for sweet foods when you're stressed out, and they help you feel better in the moment, dealing with stress. And you also know that these sweet foods are raising your glucose levels, and you want your diabetes to be better with less medicine. So you've got both needs. You've got a valid need to soothe your emotions and stress eat, and you've got a valid need to have better diabetes with less medication. You've got these conflicting needs. Both of them are your needs. and they're both valid. As opposed to us as professionals showing up in this patient's life and say, go on a sugar detox, go see a therapist, get your act together, get a grip. Don't you know sugar is bad for you? Don't you know going low carb and keto is going to take away your need for medication or reduce your need for insulin? And there, so the tone is very different. In one meeting, there are two experts talking. There's the diabetes expert, if I speak about my field, or there's the healthcare expert, and there's this patient who's the expert in their reality. The minute they leave that consult, they go home, they go back to their life. They're the expert of what they need, what they like, what their challenges are. And the other way is where I just sort of go top down and say, do this, do that. That acts like the only expert in the room is the healthcare provider. And the creators of motivational interviewing have come up with this word. It's called the fixing reflex, where I think I know more than you, so my job is to fix you. So that's the opposite of motivational interviewing. Motivational interviewing is more about, there's an expert inside this client, and they want to thrive. My job is to help them figure out what motivates them, what drives them, so that they can activate and align to what they want to do next. And once it's coming from within, it just starts to move in a very different way.
I you make this sound pretty simple, but you're basically putting your finger on the core issue, which is the problem that's not being addressed inside the individual. Maybe you guys have, I don't know, maybe you found the magic bullet, but you make it sound pretty easy to get to that. I'm not, it's not that I disbelieve you. I absolutely do believe you, but you make it sound a lot simpler than it seems like to me that it would be. Are there things that, do you guys do something special? Do you something different, something new? I mean, how does this work?
Oh, yeah. So it's definitely something you need training in. There are two ways of looking at it. Is, as of today, I'm the first and only certified motivational interviewing trainer in India. I mean, I kind of feel, happy about that, but I'm also sad about that because we need many more. We need like thousands of these people all over the world. And it takes training. And, the creators of motivational interviewing still have a beginner's mind about this. They still have.
Is this an actual formal practice, motivational interviewing?
Yes, it's
If I
a
look that
technique.
up, am I going to find out about it?
Oh, yeah, there are books and so many publications and scientific research showing the use of it. And, you could argue about
Cool.
whether
Oh,
you could argue, is motivational interviewing the best way to talk to a person? Maybe there are other ways.
even a website, motivationalinterviewing.org. I'll be
Yes.
darned.
Oh,
Okay,
yeah, the whole field.
please. This is cool.
Yes, and the foreword in my book is written by Bill Miller, Dr. William Miller, and he is one of the co-founders of motivational interviewing. And for me, it was an honor to have him write the foreword because he has dedicated, I want to say definitely 40 years, if not 50, 40 years of his life to developing this. There's a fourth edition of his book out already. And so many thousands of healthcare providers have been trained around the world in this technique. And there's a deeper spiritual base to it if you care about that.
I
Is,
do.
yeah, yeah, and whether it's spirit or whatever you want to call it, just the idea that it increases the human connection when a provider listens that deeply and validates the experience of the patient or the person with diabetes. It immediately sparks a human connection. And the minute there's a human connection, healing starts, or therapy, the relationship goes to a different level of healing and trust. And it doesn't take time. When I was in San Diego and Phil, we met, I did this talk on motivational interviewing, and I showed a slide where I'm like, if you're a busy doctor and you have only 5 minutes, now I make it look easy. You're right, Jack. I make it look easy that you can show up differently in a 5-minute consult. But it does take some thoughtfulness. And I'm constantly training my team, and I'm always showing them, hey, nice try, great effort. Here's how we can go deeper. Here's how you can try it differently. And motivational interviewing is almost like a dance. That's the way they describe it. The founders describe it as a dance. Is if you're in a partner dance and you step on someone's toe, they're going to let you know you stepped on my toe, and you can adjust and apologize and keep going. So in motivational interviewing, it's like that. Is if you understand that this is a partnership, we're equals. I'm not taller or bigger or smarter than you. If I speak in a way that doesn't work for your expertise, you'll let me know. I trust that. And they trust that if you're speaking in a way from a heart space of, I want to help you, their ego doesn't get triggered. They don't get offended. And they just clarify, you know what, not exactly that, but this. And so the relationship stays safe. So yeah, it's a whole space, it's a whole field, and we take trainings, we practice, the culture in the community of motivational interviewing is to send feedback videos, stay in contact. It's like any skill. You need to keep on sort of being with mentors who know more than you. And I still make mistakes, we're still learning.
When we talked last time, you said something that I don't think we got to go into in detail that led me to believe that the way you practice addresses, for lack of a better phrase, the whole person rather than just the pathology that they present with. Is that what this motivational interviewing is all about?
Yeah, I mean, and the whole person for me is like a double meaning, right? And in both senses, yes. So in the mental sense, we want to definitely address the whole person. Let me give you an example. Is we had an elderly gentleman with diabetes who came in and we were giving him diet advice. And he said, I can't do those things. I get my food packed from my son's house. My wife is deceased. I'm a single man. I don't cook. And my son and his wife send me food from their kitchen. So I don't want to be ungrateful and be fussy and cause difficulty where they have to cook differently for me. Now, I could say, that's your problem. You figure it out. Stop making excuses. Or I could see the whole person and say, okay, you're grateful that your son helps you. Your relationship with your son is important to you. You value that and you want to maintain that good connection with your son. And that's important to you. Now that means I'm seeing the whole person as he's not just a diabetic. He's a wonderful father. He's a, role model of the house. He probably doesn't want to feel vulnerable in front of his child. There could be so many complexities here that I don't know anything about. So I want to give space for that whole person to show up more fully in their own decision-making and their health plan. That's one thing. And at the physical level, because I'm an endocrinologist and a hormone doctor, I'm not interested only in your pancreas that secretes insulin. I'm interested in where is this blood glucose going? Where is this hormonal fluctuation going? It's going to your entire whole system. So I think endocrinologists are obliged to think about the entire body. We're not just stuck in one organ. Hormones affect the entire system. And any good doctor knows that, even Phil, right? He's not just a heart doctor. He's looking at the whole patient. And that's how healthcare is, actually, if we zoom out.
Yeah, I would say that's how healthcare should be. But unfortunately, I think all too often we do, everyone gets sort of focused just on their area and their specialty. And we do lose sight, I think, way too often of the whole person.
Yeah. Sometimes what I'll tell the patient is, look, I have thoughts about your kidney. I have thoughts about your heart. I know you have a doctor there. I know you have a yoga trainer or a personal exercise trainer, physical therapist. If you need me to get on the call with them, let's do that. So I've almost, and it's difficult in terms of time management, but I choose to do it and keep my practice of a size where I can do these things because it's just the only way I know how to really show up. I don't think I would be able to deal with myself if I was not going that extra step. And so it's almost like I'm becoming their primary care doctor. And I don't mind that because I feel like at least the person's getting the support that gives them the experience that healthcare should be giving them. And if I don't do it, I don't know if the patient's going to get that. And we're creating that culture in our team, is let's do the extra support call. Someone's stuck in the app. Someone's not able to move forward in the quiz. I've got a learning set of videos they want them to watch. We get on that little support call and help them just overcome those bumps in the road.
Okay, you're in India, which is a big country. In fact, I believe it's the most populated country in the world. You, as a culture, face similar but not identical types of nutritional, educational, and bureaucratic obstacles to your success that we face here in the United States. Because you've been in both, are familiar with both, it'd be, I think it'd be interesting just to understand um, the differences that you're dealing with in India, kind of at a high level. And then obviously, I think it'd be really cool to understand how we're pretty much the same everywhere else, but I don't know where we're the same.
Hmm. So one big difference, and the good news is that even though I live in India, I've, converted my practice to telemedicine. So I'm able to work with someone from anywhere in the world who wants to do this. We can work
Wow.
online and remotely, and I don't have a physical location. So people from my city also see me online.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's cool.
Yeah, and we're able to give such a rich experience because of so much high touch on online that I think it gives a higher experience than the in-person rushed busy visits or long wait times that a lot of people sometimes face, taking out half a day from work to have to be in a room with, other patients waiting. And so we just flipped to that in the pandemic and haven't looked back. I thought it was temporary, but then it just was so much more high touch that we're like, oh, this is better. And but the differences between India and US, these are the two places I know well. One of the biggest differences is outpatient care in India is out of pocket. So everything, whether it's blood tests or medications, of consults, all of that is out of pocket. So there's no insurance provider in between the patient and us when it comes to working on these sort of online programs. And I work with people over 3 months, 6 months. That's the biggest difference. I know that, people in the US who have gone unconventional, some of them want the person to, do the out-of-pocket payment. Some practices in the US are now beginning to work with insurance providers so that the patient can get insurance dollars or FSA dollars spend on is it FSA? The
Mhm.
healthcare dollars? Yeah, the healthcare dollars to be spent on these, programs. So that's one very big difference. Other than that, we have similar problems that the rest of the world does, is the pharmaceutical influence has penetrated education, has penetrated medical societies, medical conferences. I wrote a chapter in a book, Phil, you'll be fascinated to hear this. I wrote a lifestyle change for cardiometabolic health. Specifically, they wanted me to write on nutrition and exercise. And it was initially a talk, and the cardiology audience liked it so much. They were like, oh, the Indian Cardiology Society is coming up with a new book, and let's convert this talk of yours into a book chapter. We'll call it the lifestyle, chapter. And I wrote it and it got published. And then I got a copy of the book for my own, safekeeping. And it was a giant book, okay, 2 volumes, like huge hardcover, gorgeous printing. And as I opened the book, there were pages stuck inside with glue that were drug ads, medication ads, interspersed through the book, leaflets, like handouts. And I was so angry. I was like, I can't believe this. Basically, who paid for the printing of these expensive, beautiful books were drug companies. And I was like, oh my God. Yeah. So the
You know,
money,
we see the same thing. We see a similar thing in the United States. Broadcast media, as it turns out, gets most of their dollars from the pharmaceutical industry. I'm an American football fan, and so I like to watch a lot of football. And it seems I haven't actually done a study because I'm not that diligent, but it seems like about one in every four advertisements is for some sort of bizarre esoteric drug that's designed specifically to treat some weird thing I've never heard of, but they're paying tens of millions of dollars both to produce and to run these ads. And, it's not a new problem. I'm not, this is not breaking news here, but
Right. And that was kind of why I had to write the book. And I need people like you all to help us help each other. Phil's book is the same kind of book, is, a surgeon saying, stay off my operating table, right? That's backwards, that's against his own income stream if he says that. But he knows that he's here to help people heal. Similarly, for me, turn around diabetes is like, hey, if people have less diabetes, what'll I do? No, I'm okay with that. If we could actually end all the preventable new people getting diabetes that can be prevented, and the ones who have it that can get rid of it, let's help them get rid of it. In type 1 diabetes, if they can be as stable as possible with the lowest insulin requirement as possible, people need that information. Let's democratize it. And I honestly, I pray and I believe that the material in the book can really sort of democratize the experience of diabetes, where like the ads are coming at you, drink this juice, eat this protein bar, take this medicine, consume, buy this from me, buy that from me. Those are the ads, because there's money and there's profits and there's stock markets, all that stuff driving capitalism. Our work that isn't that glamorous, right? It's not that shiny. And a lot of this is things people know, and I joke about this. I'm like, my book could have been 4 sentences long. Reduce your carbohydrates, get good sleep, don't be stressed out, exercise. And maybe the 5th sentence could be fast if you need to. It's a 5-sentence book. But what I do in the book is help people sort of troubleshoot. And that's why the analogy of the lifestyle car is diabetes stays with you as a lifestyle condition. Even if it's type 1, life's ups and downs will throw things at you. There will be potholes, there will be detours, there will be traffic. So the analogy of the car, shows you the dynamic nature of life. There will be weddings, there will be sickness periods, there will be stress, holidays. Those are your ups and downs of life. Diabetes is not a static condition. And I troubleshoot what could go on in the nutrition wheel. What will happen when you reduce your carbohydrates? What will happen when you increase your proteins? In sleep, what are your habits to look at? What are your obstacles to changing your sleep habits? It's all about, like a manual, a user manual for all the troubleshooting, all the patients that I've worked with, all the struggles that they had, how we worked it through, a lot of patient examples, so that it becomes real in your hands is, oh, I can relate to that struggle.
yeah.
I can relate. And those are the things not discussed in the doctor's office. So
I'm wondering if it also gives people, if part of what this book is doing is giving people an oppositional voice to the dominant narrative. We tend to believe the things that we're told over and over and over again, whether we consciously make a decision about whether it's true or not. And, Phil's message, your message, the message of virtually everyone we have on this show runs contrary to the dominant media. And I've got a friend that I work with regularly who's, I can tell just by looking at him, he's not healthy at all, but he believes the dominant narrative that
yeah.
he's got to be piling in the carbohydrates and he's got to be very careful about how much protein or fat he gets. And, he's not going to listen to me. I'm a guy with a podcast, but having an endocrinologist write a book, oftentimes I think people almost just need permission. And I wonder if it's doing that as well.
Yes, is here. And just yesterday, a argument erupted on a WhatsApp group. How much protein is okay? And my friend who has read my book, he was, thinking on my lines. And this lady said, no, if you go beyond this, it's too much, but up to 1.6 grams of protein per kg body weight is okay. And so my friend said, can you tell me where you're quoting that from? What's your source?
What's your source?
Yeah. And she gave him a picture of my book. So she was misquoting me from my own book. And so he's like, wait, what page number? We're talking about the same book. And then she realized, oh, she went back and read it. And she was like, oh, and she was a doctor, he was a doctor. So the permission, to push this conversation a little bit further, one mind at a time. And I love that doctors are doing this, right? Because the more they have multiplier effects. Is I can treat one patient at a time, but how many patients will I see in my lifetime? Versus let's also get the healthcare providers on board, which is why the SMHP, the Society of Metabolic Health Practitioners, is so important. Is the providers, the health professionals also need permission to go anti-mainstream. Otherwise, we feel like we're crazy.
Yeah.
And Bill and I were part of mainstream thinking for so many years. We didn't know better. Who would tell us anything different? But we had to have the courage to break out of mainstream by our own truth. And now we have a community that supports us and nourishes us with, you're not insane, you're on the right track, keep going. We're pushing the edge here. We're pushing the boundaries of science and convention, even though there's nothing wrong with what we're saying, but the sort of the prevailing notions need to be dismantled. And this is that difficult work in, doctor communities, in patient communities, giving people that permission, Jack, to go anti-mainstream. So I've backed my book, not just with our patient experiences, but with the science that exists as of today. Here's the science behind what I'm saying. I'm not just making this up because of my opinion. Here's the science and the logic. I could have just been only spiritual, but then my book would have been canceled by the mainstream. So I had a very specific agenda, is we need this book to be embraced mainstream. It's based in science. Okay, so try it and see for yourself if it works.
Yes.
The obvious target for the book is the diabetes sufferer. Who else should read this book?
Yeah, the providers too, for sure.
Oh.
Yeah. And, so from a provider standpoint, why do you think, this should be pretty obvious, right? And I kind of kick myself these days for not, recognizing how obvious this is, right? Diabetes, too much sugar, stop putting in the sugar. Really should not be controversial at all. And yet somehow it is. And, what do you think it is that really is preventing this from becoming widespread, low carb being the basically default option in the diabetes community?
Yeah, I'm going to put a twofold answer to that. One is behavioral economics. So I got very interested in, if it's so obvious, why is it going the opposite way? And so I read this book. It's a famous book in the behavior space, is by Daniel Kahneman, Thinking Fast and Slow. And the idea there is we're being marketed to all the time, whether we realize it or notice it or not. Whether you look at science books telling children that carbohydrates give people energy, protein is for bodybuilding. All right, so that's right from childhood. Kids have got this notion that's cemented in place. You talk about us being conditioned the minute do you have that ad? It used to be on bus stops. I saw it a few years ago. Snickers. It's on a bus stop. Is hungry? Get a Snickers bar.
Yeah.
Now, whether I pay attention to that ad or not, it's there. It's getting little implants all the time. In the tech world, they call it impressions. Is how many impressions can you make on a person? And they showed that just flashing the word Coca-Cola in the Super Bowl without even putting a whole ad, and they saw an improvement in their sales. So they're doing these constant impressions on us. So the obvious solution that you and I now think is obvious isn't obvious anymore. It's hidden behind all this corporate, commercial, psychological nuancing of our brains towards the default becoming eat junk. Don't be empowered. If I go into the semaglutide controversy, right? It's an important drug to have on the market. Ozempic.
What?
Ozempic.
Oh, okay. Gotcha.
We're being told food noise. No, they want us to use the medication for food noise. But what is food noise? It's thoughts about food. How'd you get those thoughts about food? you've been marketed to. So we're making you feel disempowered to, be able to decide and know what foods you want to take or not take. You need a medication now. So these are the marketing tactics on one side, why it's not mainstream. And so it's like the two-in-one answer here is there's money that's making the common sense idea that you and I have be hidden and gone. And the second is that the repeated bombardment by that money, because of commercial interests, it becomes repeated in our head. So what Daniel Kahneman says is you can start to believe a lie if you hear it often enough. And I'm not going to get into politics, but it's just about repetition of things that people will start to believe things that they hear multiple times. So I think it's about repetition. So we have our work cut out for us in the metabolic health community to repeat our message loudly. And the challenge here is we're all self-funding ourselves. We're all using our kids' college funds and our retirement plans is what's going into spreading this message. It's just us at an individual level, putting our careers and our futures on the line, trying to create that voice.
Boy, this is deep stuff. All right, let's talk about the book. Where do we get it? How do we find it? All the normal places, I assume?
So it's on Amazon. That's your best bet, is Amazon.com. And it's available worldwide. And yeah, it should be easy to find.
Okay, so this is healthcare practitioners as well as diabetes
Yes.
sufferers.
Yes. And the reason I say it like that is, unfortunately, healthcare providers are as vulnerable to lifestyle diseases as people with diabetes. So my degree on the wall doesn't make me immune from catching diabetes myself if I go down the same track of a lifestyle disease. So if the doctor has understood the power of lifestyle change for their own health, they become the best advocate to the patient, right? And so for me, the barrier between doctor and patient really is not important. And I've made the technical stuff as simple as possible, where this information, and you know what? Doctors didn't know these things till they read the book. So many doctors, majority of doctors don't know these things the way I've learned it the hard way. And because we don't study insulin resistance and like lifestyle change at all. So it's almost like reading about diabetes for the first time for healthcare providers also from this lens. And so I've made it really simple. I'm not assuming you know anything. So it'll just help, like a 10-year-old to understand something as complex as diabetes in a way that can stick.
I want to ask a question that may take us down a path that's more than we want to go, but how it appears to me that you have gone from a place of practicing a type of medicine that is highly niche, highly specialized, highly siloed, where you're looking at a particular kind of chemicals that are floating around inside somebody's body and doing something to affect how those chemicals work. Two, looking at the whole person, not just their endocrine situation, but all the chemistry in their body, as well as how they behave, their environment. How has that shift from this super highly focused to, as you said, almost being a GP, has that had any kind of affected any kind of philosophical change in you? Do you see not just your practice, but maybe yourself and the world differently as a result of this? And I realize it's a generalized question, but
So spoiler alert, that's a very good question. Spoiler alert, I do go into this in the epilogue of my book.
oh yeah,
And in short, the way I'm going to respond to that is I might even say so much as what started as curiosity is let me zoom out and see more of the person. It's like a chicken and the egg. Did I do that because my life view was changing, or because my life view was changing, did I see this person in a more whole way? And it's difficult to tease out what came first. But my own personal journey was also going along when this, the book starts with this gentleman whose diabetes was, a challenging case. And I start with his story at the beginning of the book. And I zoom out to sort of tell you in the epilogue what's happened to me personally since that day that I met him. And I've made this book for all of you to consume. What happened to me and what was the chicken and the egg? So I think it's a little bit of both. Is my life view, worldview was changing and I met him. And because I met him, I went deeper into zooming out and increasing my, range of skills to help people like him. And that changed my worldview. So it became a positive cycle of self-improvement for me personally.
Yeah, and I do think it's very interesting in our colleagues that have, become awoken to all of this. It's never just limited to, the specialty, right? It really does change your view of the world when when you see, I guess it really comes down to, in my mind, right? When you see this sort of, enlightenment in this, professional area of your life, there's no way to really prevent that from touching all the areas of your life. And I think that's a positive largely. And I'm certainly grateful it occurred, not only because of the effects it had on my professional life, but because of the effects it's had on my entire life.
I agree. I echo that completely. And we just hope that more people can have that chance to be awake, if we use the word awakened, to experience that. And, if it ends up with more health, more gratitude, more connections, those are basic human needs being met, less suffering. These are all things all of us want.
I really want to go down that rabbit hole. I really do. But we're right at an hour. I think this is where we were the last time I talked with you. And I wanted to say next time we're going to go down that rabbit hole. But you wrote a book. All right. So we're going to go down that change to your worldview rabbit hole eventually. We're going to find out about it. I suggest, Phil, that you and Roshani should put together a seminar at the SMHP annual meeting where you guys talk about that. And that way we can kind of make it official and formal, and I won't feel like I'm hijacking the show to talk about it.
Yeah. And that'll be like sort of taking something really vague and making it almost permission to talk about it also. And Brian Ledskis also has a podcast where he talks about life's best medicine, where he's willing to have more of those, if people want, it's not forced on anyone, but if they want to talk spirit and if they want to talk self-care and self-love, let's talk about those things.
All right. I knew it was going to be good. I'm not disappointed.
Thank you for taking out time. I know this is a late evening for you all on a working day, so I appreciate the adjustment for the time difference.
Certainly worth it. Always good to connect across the oceans here. And I also look forward to the next time we're together in the same place. But once again, everyone, Turnaround Diabetes. And where else can people connect with you, Roshani, besides the book?
Yes, sure. So I'm on Instagram with my first name and my last name, and I have a YouTube channel. I'm trying to be a content creator now that I have content in the book, trying to bring that out in videos and, do that. They say the easiest part was writing the book. Now it's about getting the ideas out into, doing the marketing for the book. That's the hard part. So yes, we're trying to be more digital and be online as well. So I have a website and you can find me online.
Very good. We'll make sure that information shows up in the show notes so folks can just link to it. And I made a note to myself to make sure that your prior appearance here on Stay Off My Operating Table is also linked, because folks will enjoy interacting with you. All right. For Dr. Philip Ovadia and Dr. Roshani Sanghani, this has been Stay Off My Operating Table. Thanks for joining us. We'll talk to you all next time.
Chances are you wouldn't be listening to this podcast if you didn't need to change your life and get healthier. So take action right now. Book a call with Dr. Ovadia's team. One small step in the right direction is all it takes to get started. Contact us at ifixhearts.com/talk. That's ifixhearts.com/talk.